Dr. Corsi, the earlier information we were talking about with this action, with these committees on the Security and Prosperity Partnership evolving into this North American entity, uh, are they breaking any laws? Is there any accountability that we can hold over their head at all? I know a lot of these, there's a few elected officials, but a whole lot of unelected officials that are doing things, and then we can wake up overnight and find out they've written the rules for us. Is there anything that we can hold them accountable to right now?
Well, I think it's basically a coup d'etat by a bureaucratic coup d'etat. I mean, you don't have any treaty, you don't have any law. They might argue that some of this is an extension of NAFTA, but I mean, it's a very, such a broad extension, you can't find any explicit authorization in NAFTA for much of what's going on. There's nothing in our Constitution that allows working groups to be constituted with other nations and to be meeting on a regular basis, especially without the detailed, informed knowledge and of Congress. Congress doesn't do its job. Congress is asleep and not following this. And when you ask the congressmen about it, they are also basically brainwashed to accept free trade. That they'll just give you answers about how this is for our security and our prosperity.
And these corporate sponsors are the ones who line a lot of their pockets with the corporate donations they need.
No question about it.
Or they'll go take a spot working for that company as soon as they get out of office and have already done the deed.
Precisely. And I mean, the profit motive is what drives this. If you say, well, look, I can go move my manufacturing to China and pay nothing for my labor, of course, that's what necessitates the reconstitution of the transportation system, because if you can produce these goods with slaves, that does you no good unless you can bring those same goods back into the heart of America cheaply, which means you've got to design everything around a container movement system. These goods have to be produced to be put in containers, moved cheaply in containers. You don't want them unloaded by longshoremen in Long Beach and Los Angeles. It's too expensive. Or moved across country by United Transportation workers in trains, or truck drivers paid American wages. You want Mexican dock workers, Mexican truck drivers, and Mexican trains. And then you want we've redesigned all of our economics. I mean, the transportation economics is now on corridors to move containers. The containers are intermodal. Intermodal means you can pack the container once in China, put it in a big container island. They're building these artificial islands out in the North China Sea that are 300 football fields in area. They pack them with containers. They're building container ships that will carry 12,500 containers. That's about 4 times the size of any container ship you've ever seen, with a crew of 13. They'll bring them and unload them. It may take a week to unload these container ships. The new generation is so huge. They don't fit through the Panama Canal. They're post-Panamax, so they're going to deepen and widen the Panama Canal. And then they'll have north-south routes once the containers come in through the underbelly of the United States into North America. They'll travel up, these corridors. I-35 will be reconfigured into the Trans-Texas corridor. You'll have another version of that extending from Laredo, Texas, up to Denver. You've got Canamex, which comes in the western states by Reno and comes down south that way. South of Los Angeles and Long Beach, Hutchison Ports Holding, which is a communist Chinese ports management firm that operates Lazaro Cardenas and Manzanilla, is developing another deep water port at Punta Colonet. Once the Panama Canal is deepened and widened by Panama, then ports like New Orleans expect they'll become major container offloading sites that bring the containers up through Louisiana. Same in Houston and Corpus Christi. They also think they'll have huge container traffic then coming on to Miami. It'll come up on I-95. And every one of these corridor systems has corridor coalitions in which they're planning to, intermodal, so the container's packed one time, it's loaded onto a container ship. When it gets to Lazaro Cardenas, it's unpacked with a crane, it's put on a trucker train, it's moved to a inland port city like San Antonio or Kansas City or Denver. These inland port cities, the water that makes them a port is not the Riverwalk in San Antonio or the Platte River in Colorado. It's Lazaro Cardenas in the Pacific. And the containers then are put in these giant warehouses. You've got, the Union Pacific and the other railroads putting millions of dollars into these super railroad warehouses where the containers are again offloaded by a crane, and they're put on trucks and trains and driven to local points of distribution. Then you do it all through supply-side economics, in which you, with computer models, determine, what you need produced and delivered when, to be assembled with what. You bring it all together from different parts of the world, unload it in containers, and put it together at the point of assembly or at the point of distribution.
Now, you almost need a one-world government to make all that operate
it's so
seamlessly.
massive. Yeah.
Well, that's the point. And they don't want currency risk. They want to have, currency risk. We've already got problems in North America. You've got multi-billionaires up in Canada who invest in the exporting companies in Canada complaining that the Canadian dollar strengthening hurts their investments because Canadian exports become more expensive. The Canadian dollar were pegged to the U.S. dollar. If we had a Canadian-U.S. currency risk would be taken out of the equation.
Wow. So what's interesting when I hear you share all this, and what you shared with us was based upon many, many years of research you've been doing, and I have seen as you've uncovered little tidbits of the Chinese buying this, or they've secured this, or different groups do this, and you put the whole pieces together for the people who care to follow along with you in your work and see the big picture of what's going on. And I know this is stuff that has been minimum decades in the process of detailed acquisitions, whether it's the Chinese buying ports in Los Angeles or the Panama Canal or these kind of things. But what this tells me, just sitting back and listening to what you're saying, is particularly from a Christian worldview, when we look at all things and where the world is going in an end-time view, we focus a lot on the politics, we focus a lot on other spiritual things, but the bottom line is this age-old adage of follow the money makes a lot of these things a reality, and it's just good old-fashioned greed, like you said, that makes a lot of these evils pragmatic and reasonable to occur. And this is not original. There was big profit motives to be made in Italy and Germany in World War II, and now we're seeing people's greed setting up something that will lead to totalitarian people over every aspect of their lives. It's really like the great city Babylon talked about in Revelation. A lot of people don't talk about that aspect of the book. They talk about the Antichrist. They talk about all these other things. But there's this huge economic engine that facilitates that whole vision of the world in the last days, and there's just so much truth to it. It's the money is what really makes this world go around and run.
So in a sense, you're saying that maybe Mystery Babylon could in fact be the economic system, or heavily contributive to it?
I'm talking about the city Babylon, which is in the following chapter, which exchanges, it says, in all of these various products, including the souls of men. But it's just good old-fashioned greed and money economics. And I didn't mean to drag you into all that, Dr. Corsi, but that's what goes through my mind when I hear what you're describing.
My father was with the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
He was the public relations director, and he helped create the United Transportation Union. And I spent a lot of time with him. My brother is in transportation economics. He's a professor at the University of Maryland. We hardly agree on anything. And look, my father I understood from the time I was a kid that the way transportation is not accidental. You got to ask, why is it this way?
Mm-hmm.
And, Abraham Lincoln not only unified the North and South, he unified the East and the West. He created the legislation for the Transcontinental Railroad. He was a railroad man. He understood the need to have a rail system that could move goods and people and do so to connect areas of the country that otherwise were remote. In the 50s, when we did not have an interstate transportation system, it was very difficult to drive, from Cleveland, Ohio, where I was born, down to Florida or to California, because you had to go through so many small towns, so many stoplights. It took forever. And Eisenhower understood this. Eisenhower, before World War II, had been involved with leading a military expedition to cross the United States just in an exercise to see what it would take.
Now Dr. Corsi, he observed what was better in Germany, right? I don't mean to steal your thunder.
On the Autobahn, he saw the Autobahn and what Germany had done with the Autobahn, and he created a interstate transportation system that connected cities and made transportation within the United States workable. Our primary transportation routes are still east and west. Now, we have some north and south routes. We've got Interstate 95 that connects from New England down to Florida. But I-95 has been primarily constructed to be a New England route and then to be a route that connected from New Jersey down into Washington, down into the Carolinas, and connect from the Carolinas down into Florida. It was never considered to be a north-south corridor, whereas highways that went east and west were always considered to be east-west corridors. In fact, we've got three levels of them. We've got one set of interstate highways that cross the United States down at the level of Arizona, going in the southern route. We've got another that cross the United States in the middle at the level of Kansas. And we've got another level, interstates for like 80 that cross at the level of Cleveland. We've got three levels of interstate highways going east and west. And those were the most developed and the first developed, and then filled in with north-south routes. We only have really one Canada to Mexico highway that was ever conceived of as such, and that's Interstate 35. That was always the only real north-south corridor we've got. Now, the reconfiguration of these containers coming in emphasizes north-south corridors, not so much east and west. And that's where the reconfiguration is going on to be north-south. That's why I-35 is going to be the first, and they can't redo I-35. The way I-35 was designed, it was, again, still mostly an intercity highway. The bridges, since 1990s, the Federal Highway Administration has been holding hearings and writing reports saying the bridge infrastructure won't handle the truck traffic. It's not separate truck lines from car lines with separate train lines. A north-south corridor to move containers needs that configuration. The trains cannot use eminent domain. They can't take the land. But if the train corridor is built in the middle of the highway corridor, the 4 football fields wide Trans-Texas corridor, eminent domain can take the land and then lease it to the railroads. That's what's being done. You need the railroads because one train might move 300 to 500 containers. One truck's going to move 1 or 2 containers. So your trucks are like, if you imagine your transportation system like Gulf, your trains are your drivers and your big clubs. And your trucks are the short clubs down to the putter.
Right. Well, now, my guess is for all of this massive money spent in this infrastructure, what Americans are going to see is not American-made goods flowing down this.
Absolutely
but
not.
Chinese-made goods or other similarly imported goods, and we're going to make it even cheaper and more cost-effective to import these other goods and make the American worker even that much less competitive as a result.
Well, that's right. And see, first of all, the goods are going to be mass-produced by slave labor. So that means, by definition, that quality is going to be diminished. Okay, and quality control will not be the major consideration. Lead paint, the toy companies doing the lead paint knew it was there. It's just a cost of business to have a certain number of those toys found and thrown out. That's still cheaper than paying the labor and getting the materials not to use lead paint.
Well, thank goodness most of those brain cells are already killed by the fluoridated water.
Right.
Before the paint ships, so.
And, the manufacturing that goes on with the slaves, it'll take 50 years before China goes through some of the problems that every slave state goes through, where the slaves don't want to do it anymore. But take 50 to 100 years to get to that point.
Well, they're less likely to sit on their guns and not turn them on their own people, although that may be changing everywhere. We've already seen that when things get desperate.
Chinese will turn their guns on their own people in a second.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a heartbeat. That won't even cause them the loss of a night's sleep.
The question comes is our own country